Okay, so at the beginning of the section, beginning in July, Harry receives a remote control beach buggy as a gift, and he uses it to taunt Jordan. So he makes him watch the car until Jordan wants it proper bad, and then Harry shut the door in Jordan's face. So what Kelman is perhaps trying to do is show that idea that Harry is taking control of that situation. He's manipulating people who have perhaps put him down and showing that he can be in control. And it's directly after that Harry has his sexual encounter with Makita, who teaches his tongues initially, but then he takes the encounter too far when he put Harry's hand down her pant. And obviously, if you remember that situation and the idea that shows us about peer pressure and how perhaps children are forced into things that they don't necessarily want to do, Harry finds it really, really hard to stop it, and he doesn't really understand what's going on in that situation. So Harry and Lydia are really, really horrified by what's gone on, and it's Makita's dominant and intimidating behaviour that causes Lydia to say, "At least my boyfriend's not a murderer." And it's after that that Harry and Lydia show a united front against Makita, and she split proper quiet. So we sort of see their relationship coming back together, because obviously in the previous section it had broken down quite a lot and she told him to F off. So later in the section, Harry and Dean continue in their search for the dead boy's killer, and they go back to the basketball court where Harry remembers a scene between the dead boy killer and Crossfire. And he remembers that he's actually seen this scene before, so he sort of goes back into it and he visualizes what he saw on that day. And Killer and X-Fire called the dead boy a poser, and they all end up pushing each other. And Harry remembers that the dead boy comes back and spits water on Killer's bike, which makes him go red eyes, is the quotation Harry uses. And Harry remembers feeling that somebody was going to get killed. So it's another example of dramatic irony, because Harry has been aware all along of the argument that leads to the dead boy's death. So he knew it to begin with, and the readers sort of picked up on that. He was even there at the basketball court when it happened, even though he didn't quite remember this argument to begin with, and it takes going back there to visualise it and to remember what happened. So even though Harry even knows the motive behind this happening as well. The dead boy standing up to DFC and threatening their reputation. So it's Dean and Harry's curiosity that leads them to be cornered in the basketball court by Crossfire, Dizzy Killer and Makita. And it's here that the DFC discover that Harry and Dean have the wallet with the blood and the dead boy's picture. So Killer's face goes stiff and he reacts really badly, and he pushes Makita and says, "This shit's gone too far, man. It's over." So if you remember at this point, he runs off and Crossfire and Dizzy attempt to harm Harry and Dean, but Lydia saves them, having filmed the incident on her phone. They get away thanks to the pigeon doing a shit on X-Fire's face. Remember, shit is a quotation. And they save the film on the computer in the library. So it's after this incident that Harry realises that the bleach cloud in the toilet he eases himself of is just the bubbles from the bleach, and that signals to the reader that he's losing his innocence and his childlike state. Because if you remember right at the beginning, he says he likes weeing on the bleach bubbles in the toilet because it's like weeing on a cloud. So you can make that comparison and that contrast. So before Harry's death, he comments that the war was here and he sees the playground on fire. So the community and Harry are really upset that the playground has been vandalised, and Harry sees Killer through the smoke holding a burning wood chip for donkey's hours. So it appears that Killer is on the edge and he's psychologically affected by his involvement in the dead boy's murder. And also, if you look at the playground as a metaphor for childhood, obviously, or Harry's childhood in particular, it goes up in flames and it goes up in smoke. So Kelman heightened the tragedy of Harry's death by making it a hot sunny day. So if you're thinking about that idea of pathetic fallacy, well, actually at the beginning of this, there isn't a use of pathetic fallacy, and the weather is actually used to heighten the tragedy at the end of the novel. Harry kisses Poppy and he believes that they just have to stay alive until Monday, then everything will be alright, and he runs through the street and then it begins to rain. So your idea of pathetic fallacy comes in at this point. And also the structure is already becoming cyclical because it rains at the beginning when Harry and Dean are at Chicken Joe's where the dead boy has been murdered. Even so, Harry runs through and he seems at ease at the world, and he shouts, "Poppy, I love you, pigeons, I love you." He makes a list of those things that he really, really loves whilst he's running. and he knows if he makes up the stairs he'll be home and dry, but the killer came out of nowhere, and Harry calls out Mama and describes a taste of metal, and his regret that his Mama is at work and Papa is too far away. So the pigeon's there at that point, and he does refuse to answer whether he works for God, but he tells Harry that he's been called home. And as Harry dies, he says the same line as the beginning, really reinforcing that cyclical structure of the novel. He says, "You could see the blood, it was darker than you thought." And then that last line of the novel, if you remember, Stephen Kelman said is perhaps one of the most important lines of the novel. It perhaps sums up the whole novel, because he says all babies look the same, and maybe there he's really talking about the idea that we all start off the same as human beings. We all have the same potential when we're just babies, but actually it's the society we grow up in that changes us and changes what we become. So that's all for the summary of Pidgin English. I really hope you found it helpful.